Bwe tusaba obusabi nga tetutegedde kye tusabira tuyinza obutatuuka ku kye twagala. Abantu bulijjo bwe bamala okusaba senga oli bamusabidde ng'ayagala mulimu kitegeeza agenda n'anoonya omulimu ogufuna. So ensonga ezo zetwagala okuba nga tusabira bannayuganda batuuke okumanya nti tulina obuzibu obumu bwe twetaaga okusabira be bannayuganda bonna okutegeera ekigenda mu maaso mu ggwanga lyaffe nti abantu betwagala okujja mu buyinza bo bennyini balina enkola eyeeterawo abantu. Kati ate abantu baffe kizibu okutegeera bwe muba temukisabidde n'ekyo kufuna kubikkulirwa okwo. Kizibu okutegeera nti abantu abamu bateekeddwawo buteekebwa era kyova olaba nti bangi batya n'okuboogerako kubanga bona ayogera nga baga nti ono ayogera ki nga ffe tuyina. Naye nga gavumenti kyezikola ez'abannakyemaliranga eno kwe kuteekawo oludda oluusi lwe muyinza okulowooza nti luvuganya naye nga be balweteereddewo. Naye ebibala bye biraga ng'akalulu ka 221 omukyalo omu bwe yatambulanga aga nti obuzibu si bwa mukulembeze naye enkola system ng'aga nti yennyononefu. Ne ku mulundi guno tulaba ebintu ebigenda mu maaso ng'aliyo abavaayo okunenya abalala gurupu nga zino ezivaayo okulaba nga zisindikiriza obwannakyemalira. So kaakati ensonga eyo nkulu nnyo bannayuganda ogimanya kubanga n'abakulembeze bangi batyo gyogerako nti be mulowooza nti bajja kutununula naye ate abo bazibu nnyo kubanga be balemezaawo omuntu ono mu ntebe okusobola okuba nga agenda mu maaso olw'ebikolwa eby'enjawulo abantu kwe bategeerera omuntu ali ku mulamwa n'atali. Kakati bwe tuba nga tuddayo buto nga twalindirira ekikolwa kirina kuva mu bakulembeze nti mukole kino ne watabaawo kikolebwa kati tuddayo buto mu kkooti ziri tuzzeemu buto okubanga abalala banenyezebwa nti be batavuddeeyo. Awo omanya nti waliwo obuzibu obw'amaanyi obwetaaga okweŋŋanga nga waliwo abasajja n'abakazi abasobola okulaba nti be tubadde tulowooza nti bali ku lwaffe bakolera kunyweza bano na kuleeta kye tuyinza okugamba nti ono omwana muwozi project ejja naye ng'ejja eriko bano abaginyweza. So ebyo bikulu okumanya. Tuyimirire tusabe. Tusabira ensonga 3 okumanya kyekiddako okukolebwa kikulu nnyo okukisabira bannayuganda okubeera abamalirivu mu ekyo ku ggwanga lyabwe nga balirwanirira. N'ensonga ey'okusatu kwe kufuna okumanya abantu abatuufu abalina okununula eggwanga lyaffe ne batatunuulira buli ayimiridde nti ono yavuddeyo erinnya lye liri waggulu naye agenda tununula naye ng'ate batuliddemu buli lukwe. Katusabe. Mukama tukweyanziza ku lw'ekiseera ekifaananako nga kino. Tusaba essaala eno ey'okukkiriziganya mu linnya erya Yesu Kristo omwana wa Katonda omulamu nti bannayuganda n'abakulembeze banaayambala amaanyi n'obumalirivu n'okumanya buli omu nti lino eggwanga lyabwe n'obulyako obugenda mu maaso n'essente zikozesebwa za muwi wa musolo ne bayimirira okulwanyisa n'okuggyawo obwannakyemalira nga buli omu ategedde nti omukka gwassa Katonda yasalawo lwagutwala so si mwana wa muntu yenna. Era tusaba bannayuganda bafune okumanya n'okutegeera nti olutalo luno si lwa muntu omu nga front oba yokka abakulembeze abagirimu naye lwa buli munnayuganda yenna okuyimukiramu nga n'ekiseera kyatuuka dda nga bwe wayogera Mukama n'ogamba ndi mmaze ogaana Sawulo okubeera kabaka bw'otyo Mukama tukimanyi nti n'ekiseera n'obunnabbi obuze buweebwa nti kyaggwako dda ekya gavumenti eno naye kibadde kirindirira abantu abatuufu okuvaayo okuyimirira okulaba nga enkyukakyuka ejja. Kyetuva tusabira obumalirivu okubaawo buli ssekinnoomu okununula eggwanga lye okulijja mu matigga n'okulijja mu mikono gy'abo ababadde baliwamba. Tusabye obulungi bwo n'ekisa kyo okwongera okulabisibwa era otulungamye otukulemberemu n'obukuumi bwo ne mu kiseera kino mu Kristo Yesu. Amiina. Tweyanza nnyo olw'okutuwonga
Thank you so much for deliverance to God. We hope that God will help us. I want to take this opportunity to invite this side. To invite the chairman of the front, retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, to come and speak to the media.
I think we need to design these podiums differently.
To cover better for this.
Because now it seems it's a podium of the microphones. And one cannot have where to put your paper. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen of the media. And I recognize all the leaders of the front and the activists who have joined us for this press statement. We have been criticized for having long press statements, and we are determined to make this one hopefully much shorter than we have had in the previous occasions. And this is really an end-of-year statement, a very difficult year that we have had. In fact, very difficult years that we have had in the recent past. And from October, we as the front have been talking about a crisis in our country. The crisis which we presented formally, officially to the country, with many areas highlighted that constitute this crisis. This crisis that we have been talking about is intensifying very fast and widening. And I think we don't need... Oh, there is a problem with the voice? Okay, since I'm alone, I hope you can sanitize your equipment when I finish. So the crisis that was presented in October has been getting deeper and wider. And we shall only touch on a few areas of that crisis, simply to show that deepening and widening of the crisis. The first is in the healthcare area, where, as you have been witnessing, many healthcare workers have been protesting what is going on in the healthcare system. Their conditions of work, the facilities or absence of facilities to use, and indeed their reward, what motivates them to work. And this is a matter that is not going to go away by just wishing it away. It's a matter that is going to be with us until we make fundamental decisions. So we had the strike of doctors recently, and I think today is the start of the strike of laboratory technicians across the country. And these are very, very many public health care workers on whose work all the others depend. Because a doctor cannot make a diagnosis without a laboratory technician doing his or her work. And so, even as they are trying to resolve the crisis caused by the interns and the senior house officers, now, even if those go back, they will not work because the laboratories on which they depend are going on strike. So there is a deep problem, crisis in the healthcare sector that definitely needs a fundamental attention to that area. There is a crisis which I'm sure everybody here will be affected by, of education. Our children have been, as we have pointed out before, out of schools longest in the entire world. And now some flimsy statements have been made regarding how they go back to school. And it's anybody's guess how those schools will function. To start with, they have said that those who are clogging the same levels of education, some will go ahead and join higher classes. So we now have 2 years of senior 1. All of them just finished primary 7. Nobody has studied the first year in second. So some of the P7 graduates are going to senior 2. Those who finished senior 5, senior 4 are going to senior 6. They are candidates. They were candidates of senior 4, now they are candidates of senior 6. Without going through any preparation. So this is total chaos that our schools have been lumped with. They have been told that each school will figure out how the students who have not had education of the previous class will combine that education of the previous class with the present one. Every school will find its own way of figuring out. Now, this is not a way to manage education. So clearly, a generation of Ugandans is destroyed by all this incompetence and chaos that has been occasioned to our education system. Now, even as they say kids should go back, nobody's caring how many can actually afford to go back. They're just saying we are going to open schools, but how will kids get back? When their parents themselves were locked down for 2 years, have no capacity to take their children back to school. How will kids go back to school? Other problems have occurred in the last 2 years. We have now thousands and thousands of children mothers. Those who were in schools who are now mothers. No policy, no guidance on how these school children who are mothers will have their education, or have we condemned them not to have education? So there is a crisis, a deepening crisis in education. Teachers, nobody is really figuring out how many teachers will actually turn up for the new year and in what shape they will be. Because even these teachers have not been in class for a very long time. Some have been engaged in totally different activities, making bricks and selling chapatis and so on. So in what form, how many are the teachers coming back? How will they be able to undertake this? Nobody has an idea about all this. The third crisis we want to touch on is the crisis of local governments. We have a lot of duties that were decentralized, roles that were decentralized to local governments, including cities and urban authorities. Last year we created, were they 9 or 8 more cities? Eh? How many? 8. It's not easy to keep count. So we have now 9 cities. We have many municipal authorities and town councils or divisions of cities. These are local governments that have direct responsibilities of service to the citizens. These local governments all over the country, they are bankrupt. No money. They are non-functional. The local governments we are talking about. Apart from some salaries that come from the central government to the workers who are in the local governments, there is really nothing going on in all these areas. Yet, all these local governments and urban authorities are choking with debt because the underfunding has been chronic. Thirdly, in the crisis we are talking about is the post-COVID recovery of businesses and persons' livelihoods. The businesses that were locked down, many of them collapsed as a result. And up to now, there is clearly no plan that is being implemented to revive, to resuscitate these businesses, especially the small businesses and the micro businesses on which Ugandans depend. If you look at the neighborhood, a lot of specific actions were taken to revive people's livelihoods and businesses. Like in Kenya, they reduced VAT from 16 to 14%. They reduced income tax and the thresholds to provide people relief so that they can recover. They reduced borrowing rates, bank rates, so that people can borrow and resuscitate their businesses. They provided support for the small enterprises and micro businesses to recover their activity. Here, the contrary happened. Taxes were increased. Borrowing rates are high because the government is the biggest borrower in our market anyway. And there is no support to people. Businesses in towns are closing. The landlords, there was no indication or guidance about how people who did not trade, who did not work for months, their businesses closed. Some are still closed. The bars and other businesses are still closed 2 years. Are they supposed to continue paying rent as their businesses are closed, or what happens to this? So there is a lot of challenge for the crisis is intensifying for businesses and persons. There is still a challenge, a crisis of security. And we have a curfew now for 2 years, which curfew is being used not to control COVID, but to extort money from the already poor people. The borders, everywhere you find, they are laying ambushes for them to extort money. To extort money from people who have delayed to close their shops or whatever. To extort money from all kinds of suffering and struggling Ugandans. Curfew is not a COVID measure. It is simply maybe some kind of a security measure of the state, or simply a way of keeping those security people earning since they are not being paid or paid enough. Then amidst all this crisis, of course, our forces went to Congo illegally. They continue to be in Congo. Our children who get problems, like I have had some, there are already some casualties. They are getting casualties while acting in contravention of our constitution, in contravention of our laws. Spending resources that would possibly be alleviating some of these crises in violation of our laws and our constitution. Now, we addressed that last time, and so I wouldn't need to dwell on it. Lastly, amongst the crises we want to highlight is the impunity regarding the will of the people, which we saw in Kayunga. You know, just last week. The kind of total disregard for people's will. Of course, this is what has been going on in all the elections that this country has organized. In fact, since we became Uganda in 1960, we became an independent Uganda in 1962, we have never had an election that can be used to have people's will expressed. The elections are used to suppress the people's will rather than to express it. Whether it's the 1980 election, which sparked off the war that brought this regime to power, whether it's the elections organized under this junta, all of them are extremely disturbing. Now elections are, for all intents and purposes, armed engagements. They are periods of war. As soon as an election is declared, the members roll out of the barracks. The soldiers and with the chains of bullets wrapped around them advance to the elections. Those are the types of elections that we are talking about. And so this, as you know, is the very basis why the People's Front for Transition was launched. Because we came to the very clear conclusion that elections in and of themselves will not take away armed rule in our country, military rule in our country. And so that is a fundamental crisis that the country must continue to grapple with. That we are ruled by people who are doing so in complete disregard of what the owners of the country think about them. So in conclusion, we are finishing 2021 with a challenge as a country of how to deal with this deepening, widening crisis that we, of course, characterized in summary as a crisis of failure to thrive by our people. And so, as we possibly break off for the holiday season, end of year holiday season, we want to make it categorically clear that key interventions, urgent interventions, must be undertaken one way or another. And these key interventions are the main thrust of this briefing. First, there has to be a special fund for all government and government-aided schools to deal with the reopening of schools 2022. The fund that will make it possible for those schools not only to open, but to provide decent education service to our children without parents having to be made to pay for children to go back to school. 2022. It's not enough just to say, let children go back to school. Money must be put in place. First of all, those government schools that were being supported by government, the support that was being given was already minuscule. It could not provide education to anybody. It was minuscule. It was a lie. We must provide funding for every child that is registered in a government school to cover their education costs for 2022, so that all registered children are able to go back to school and to access learning processes. Secondly, a special fund must be provided for private schools. For private schools that are registered by government, that have been paying taxes to government, a special fund must be provided to these schools ahead of opening. Private schools provide 20% of all the education services in this country. 1 in 5. These are our children. They are not, these are children of Ugandans who are accessing these private schools. So they must. Now, these schools have collapsed because they couldn't pay loans. They couldn't pay their staff to maintain them. They have collapsed. They must be supported by a special fund ahead of opening. Thirdly, the teachers we are telling to go back and teach surely will not teach if paid what they were being paid. It won't happen. So we are again telling a lie to open schools for teachers to go on a strike. Why should we do that? Because what they were being paid, very little as it was then, has now been greatly overtaken by inflation. The cost of living has, escalated in the country at the time we are telling these teachers to go back to teach. Are we just telling them to report at school and just hang around there? Or we want our children to learn? Teachers must be paid if we want our children to learn. And as we have pointed out before, the strength of any country is the knowledge in that country. We have undermined our country already enough by denying the building of knowledge for 2 years. It cannot continue. So we must pay teachers. The remuneration of teachers must be stepped up to match the inflation, to match the workload that they will be required to deliver on. Because as we have said, they have been directed to teach what should have been taught in 2 years in 1 year. It means they have to work overtime to try and get these kids to catch up. When not paying them, that simply cannot work. We must raise the salaries, the statement must be out before they go back. Fourthly, there has to be a policy on child mothers that we have created, and provision for them to go back to school. So, maybe arrangements for nurseries at the school where their kids can be kept as the kid mothers are in class, or whatever necessary arrangements. There has to be a policy on how these kid mothers continue with their education. 5, a fund for the urgent health care improvements that have been presented by the health care workers. It's not enough to say we have now a supplementary to pay their salaries. Yes, maybe if you pay interns a little more, they may go back to the hospitals. But it is us paying them that added money, yet we are not going to get treatment, even if they go back to the hospitals. We who have increased their salaries, how are we going to get health care when there are no facilities for them to use where they are? Even themselves, how will they be confident to work on us when there are no protective materials for them to use, when their colleagues died of COVID the other day and are still dying? So this cannot be something that is treated by just tinkering on the edges of their request. We have to provide a special fund to urgently deal with the improvements that are necessary in our healthcare system, including, of course, remunerating them commensurately. Number 6, we must also equally pay attention, because, you know, dealing just piecemeal with public sector delivery of services cannot work. Like I said, if you pay doctors and lab technicians are not working, you have not solved anything. Similarly, if you deal with healthcare system and you don't deal with the system that supports the healthcare system will not work. All of public service is integrated. Therefore, our 6th demand is that service conditions for all public servants, including the policemen who are harassing us, because the reason they are extorting money, give me 5,000, and being humiliated on the roads and their offices begging and extorting money, is that they have nothing to eat, you know? And we have continuously advocated for proper pay for all our servants, and especially those who provide security services. The police and the UPDF must be paid decently so that they don't have to rely on illegal means of trying to survive. So the whole public health sector, of our country must have a review of their remuneration in line with inflation, because everything is running away. How do people cope, you know? Fuel, which was 3,000, the other time is now coming to 5,000. It's about 5,000. And that impacts on all other costs. Number 7, we have to have urgently a special economic stimulus package that tackles taxation. As we have already said, part of the tax policy of government is ill-advised, even without the difficulties we are in. Because when you put taxes very high, you cause people to find all ways of avoiding it. Tax avoidance increases correspondingly. But secondly, consumption, because prices are high, consumption becomes low. People can't afford the prices. And when they are not buying, although you have tax on the commodities, nobody's paying that tax. So if you lower taxes and people consume more, although you are getting a small tax on every item, because of the increased consumption, you get more than the one who is taxing highly. They have never got it. But now this is a crisis, and we have to review this. We have to especially directly deal with the rising fuel prices. And Kenya has intervened, as it should. There has to be an intervention, because fuel prices, as I have said, impact the rest of the economy. Interest rates must be adjusted, and they will not be effective as long as the government is still the biggest borrower in our market. We must capitalize, and there should be a very clear fund and accessibility to the fund by small businesses and micro businesses on how to restart and improve their businesses. Electricity and water must be addressed. I had some flimsy sounds about electricity prices, just flimsy. We must deal with electricity. We should have the cheapest electricity in the world, because our electricity is almost free. It is provided by water that God moves around. Nobody pays water to run. In the river Nile, it runs on its own. And by running, it generates power very, very cheaply. You just put a wheel, and it turns the wheel and gives you power. Why should we pay that power so expensively that we have to now destroy all the trees and all kinds of things? The power and the water must be addressed. Rent on the locked down businesses must be addressed. Rent on the locked down businesses. Bank interests on the locked down businesses must be addressed. Number 8, we must urgently provide funding for local governments, cities, and urban authorities. Because those, as I have said, they are the providers of the basic services to the people, and they are bankrupt. Number 9, curfew must end so that people can move and work. Curfew has to come to an end. Lastly, the UPDF, which continues to fight in Congo unconstitutionally, and which we addressed a whole conference on, should withdraw. And we talked about how the ADF problem can be addressed, and we believe that it can indeed be addressed without us deploying the forces and spending the colossal amounts of money that we are spending when there is all this crisis that we have to deal with. And so, having said that, all that needs money. All those 10 measures are 10 measures of expenditure. We believe that money is there. We don't have to create, we don't have to print that money. That money is there. It has to be reorganized. You may have heard the Inspector General of Government formally inform the country that every year we lose 10 trillion in corruption. 10 trillion. Now, when we talk about 1 trillion, it's unimaginable for an ordinary Ugandan. 1 trillion. Because 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. 1 billion is 1,000 million. Now, many Ugandans have never even had 1 million. So you can imagine 1,000 million that becomes a billion. And 1,000 billion that make 1 trillion. But every year they are stealing 10 trillion. Every year. It is the money Mr. Museveni said, go slow, don't hunt them down. They are building for us 5-star hotels. It's all right. And of course we know who has built those 5-star hotels. You know? Mr. Museveni himself said when he retires, he will go into his hotel and real estate businesses. So most likely he's actually talking about himself. They should go slow on him. So the money is not the problem. The problem is that it's simply we have put it forward to be used by individuals on their estates. We should recover this money and apply it to this crisis. The wasteful expenditure, the most notorious of course of which is State House. State House, for heaven's sake, is supposed to be the home of a president. That is what State House is. Expenditure there should be the expenditure of the home. Food, washing maybe things, cleaning the compound. That is the expenditure of State House, nothing else. Anything to do with the work of the president is in the president's office, not in State House. But we have now State House taking more money than about 5 ministries combined. goes to the home. The COVID money we borrowed. Last year you saw 1 trillion going to State House for secret work in the home. What secret work is there in the home? So it's not money, the wasteful expenditure. If we cut it, if we cut all the wasteful expenditure around the government, it's enough to apply to these urgent interventions that we have talked about. And of course, they are the wrong priorities that are consuming a lot of money. Wrong priority, which is maybe not stolen, but applied to wrong things. And, you know, the whole wrong infrastructure, you find, you know, trillions applied on an infrastructure project that is just a white elephant. And, you know, there are so many of those. And lastly, in the recovery of, in assembling of the money needed in these interventions, is that the remuneration going around from our purse, from the public purse, must be rationalized across the board. Today you have some people earning 50 million from the public purse per month. Others, like we have noted, doctors who are doing incredibly important job and working 24 hours on the wards. These interns getting 700,000. Somebody is getting 50 million from the public purse. It's okay if you're a businessman paying, your company is paying you 100 million, I won't complain. But what comes out of the public purse must be rationalized. Having said that, there is a crisis, there are urgent demands. It's possible to meet the demands as we break for the holiday. We all must put a focus on ensuring that these interventions are undertaken. These interventions, which are interventions for our survival, must be undertaken. The 10 interventions have to be undertaken urgently. The ones which, for example, impact on the education of our children have to be undertaken ahead of the children, again, being wasted in the schools they say should open. And the calendar that has been announced is that the schools will open on the 10th of January. So actually we are saying that these interventions should be in place by the end of the first week of January. Yes. These are matters of life and death for citizens. It cannot continue being a joking matter. We joke, we perish. And so by the end of the first week, we shall make the review with a view to getting all Ugandans to now take action to cause these changes that are necessary. As everybody has seen, without any action, nothing would happen. If those interns had not fought, even the little that they are being promised is about to come would not come. Nothing comes without fighting for it. We are therefore, we have been, since the last conference at JEMA headquarters, we told you we are starting the move to rally our activists, the Red Card Front activists, to rally them for action. And we have some plan. We had laid out a plan for doing so. But in light of this urgent and intensifying crisis, we have taken a decision to accelerate that plan so that by the end of the first week, indeed, we are in a position to have the Red Card Front activists in a position to coordinate and guide our people in whatever actions will be necessary thereafter. So we are not going to have a holiday really. We are going to be working overtime to get ourselves in a position that can help to coordinate and guide fellow Ugandans in this process of working for the changes that we need to save us. And everybody has a duty, as we have already said. The actions we are talking about are actions imposed on us by Article 3 of our Constitution. And Article 3 imposes a duty on every Ugandan. So this is not a matter for Besigye, for Lord Mayor, for Honorable Mukaku here. No, this is a matter for every Ugandan. Finally, as you all know, this week or this weekend will be Christmas. And so I think it's in order that we also talk about Christmas. The life and the mission of Christ, whose birth all Christians celebrate this week, is very relevant to the times our country is in today. Christ was born during a very oppressive rule of the Roman Empire. At that time, religious leaders had actually been corrupted and worked closely with the oppressive rulers. The judges didn't dispense justice, but dispensed the will of the rulers. And the people lived in fear of the rulers. Those were the times in which Jesus Christ was born. And the ministry of Christ, his work, which only lasted 3 years, was about pushing back against this injustice while preaching love and dignity for all. And as you remember, those of you who are conversant with the Bible, Christ had to throw tables when he found the synagogues themselves being messed up because of corruption. He became, quite agitated and turned the tables and threw out everybody. So the work of Jesus prioritized those who were weak and marginalized. In fact, as again the Bible scriptures say, his message was that if you lose one sheep, you'd rather leave the others and go to seek the one that has been lost. That was at the center of his ministry. Now, he was persecuted and killed on the Roman cross. But today, Christ has the largest number of followers in the world. About 2.5 billion people follow Christ, only followed by the followers of Islam, who I think are about 1.9 billion. And the headquarters of the Roman Empire is the seat of the Pope. So the pursuit of justice and dignity for our people should be inspired by the life and ministry of Christ, whose birth we remember and celebrate this week. The terror and persecution we confront should confirm to us that we are on the right path. So, to all Christians out there in Uganda, let's celebrate the birth and life of Christ in spite of the terrible times we are in. On behalf of the Red Card Front, or the People's Front for Transition, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year when it comes. And I've said all this for God and my country. Mu bufunzo obw'ekitalo mu Luganda, okuva mu mwezi ogw'ekkumi tuzze nga tutegeeza eggwanga nga bwe waliwo embeera enkambwe enyigiriza buli omu wano mu ggwanga gye tuyina okukolako. Embeera eyo egenze yeeyongera kusajjuka kuva mu kiseera ekyo n'okutuusa olwaleero. Kati nga tumalawo omwaka, twayagadde nannyo tuteeke essira mu bifo 4 oba 5 embeera eyo mwe yeeyongeredde okwonooneka. Ekisooka bye ebyobulamu, era nga bwe mwalabye abasawo babadde nga bagaanye okukola olw'embeera eziri mu malwaliro. Embeera eyo tenavaawo. Twawuliddeko nti bagenda oba oli awo abasawo kubawa ku ssente, naye abalala ate ababadde nga tebali mu abo abakola mu zi laboratory, abakebera emisaayi, musulo n'ebirala okutegeeza abasawo ekiruma omulwadde, ate abo bo batandika olwaleero obutakola. Nabo balina ensonga ze zimu. N'olwekyo ensonga eri mu byobulamu I know how to deal with the rain. So ensonga y'ebyobulamu y'emu ku nsonga ezeeyongedde okuba enzibu. Ey'okubiri y'ebyobuyigirize, education. Abaana baffe bamaze emyaka 2 nga tebali mu masomero. Ekiseera ekisinga eky'abaana abalala mu nsi zonna Katonda ze yateeka ku nsi. Kati abaana abo balangiridde nti baddayo mu masomero, naye embeera gye baddirayo mu masomero nga tetegeerekeka era nga yeetaaga okutunulwamu mangu ng'abaana tebanaddayo mu masomero. Bagambye ti abaana abamu bajja kubuuka ekiraasi bagende babuuke ze bandibadde babeeramu, bagende mu z'omu maaso, kubanga kati nga tulina abaana abamaze ekyomusanvu ba myaka 2. Kati abaasooka bo babagambye bagende mu kyokubiri, senior 2, newankubadde senior 1 tebagisoma. Kati abakakukola ebigezo babenga be bagenda mu senior 1. N'ebirala bwe bityo abaali bamaze senior 4 y'embeera y'emu. Abatabadde mu masomero bagambye bagende butereevu mu P1. N'ebirala bwe bityo. Kale embeera eyo yeeyongedde kutabuka. What do we do? Seems maanyi gange gakyakola. Yes. Katugende mu maaso bwe binayongerayo tulina plan B. So ekyokusatu mu mbeera eyo ezze nga eyonooneka mwe muli n'embeera ya gavumenti ez'ebitundu, era gavumenti ezo ezandibadde nga zikola ku mirimu egisinga obungi egy'obuweereza eri abantu baffe. Gavumenti ezo zirudde nga tezifuna ssente era zirina amabanja agazituuse mu bulago era tezikyakola. Kati embeera eyo kitegeeza nti kye tubadde tulwana nakyo eno waggulu kigenda kweyongerera ddala bwe kituuka mu local government. Ekyokuna y'embeera y'abantu kuva lwe twava abantu ne business kuva lwe twava mu migalo gye twayitamu eja COVID. Kubanga mu kiseera ky'omuggalo oba emiggalo yombi gye twayitamu, business nyingi zavaamu nga tezikyayina busobozi obugenda mu maaso, nezo zibadde zikyagezaako okwewalula zigenda ziggalawo. N'abantu sekinnoomu ne bu bizinesi bwabwe obutono bwe baali bakola okuyimirizaawo amaka gaabwe obwo bwazikirira. N'olwekyo gavumenti endala ezirumirirwa abantu zitaddewo enkola ennungamu ey'amangu okutaasa bizinesi n'abantu. Ekitabaddeewo wano mu kifo ky'okukola ekyo bakoze ekidde emabega. Emisolo mu kifo ky'okugikendeeza nga bannaffe e Kenya bwe baakola, baakendeeza VAT okuva ku bitundu 16 ku buli 100 ne badda ku 14, wano esigadde bwetyo. Emisolo emirala gyo gyeyongedde ne giremesa abantu okusobola okweddaabulula. N'olwekyo emisolo, essente omuwendo gwe zeewolerwako, interest rate, bino bikwatagana nnyo n'engeri ki abantu gye basobola okwezza engulu. Ebbeeyi y'amafuta eriwo olwaleero era ezze nga yeeyongera nga teri kigikolwako. Era nga bwe ngambye abafaayo ng'e Kenya batutte obuvunaanyizibwa okulaba nti ebbeeyi y'amafuta bagikolako n'esobola kubanga eteredde. Wano buli geeyongera buli lunaku n'ebirala byonna, kubanga amafuta bwe geeyongera n'ebirala byonna nga kwe bitambulira. So eyo ensonga kati etuuse we tulina okulaba nti ekolwako. Ekyokutaano kyekya embeera ya security y'ebyokwerinda era eyeeyongera okutaawaanya abantu. Tuzze mu kiseera kya kafyu okugaana abantu okutambula kuva ssaawa emu ey'akawungeezi okutuuka ku makya kumala emyaka 2 kati. Era ng'ekiseera ekyo tekiyamba mu nsaasaanya oba butasaasaanya kirwadde kya senyiga omukambwe ono, wabula kikozesebwa okutulugunya n'okubba ate abo abali obubi. Aba bodaboda be bakwata buli lunaku ne babajjako obusente obutono bwe bandibadde nabo. Abantu bakwatibwa nti simanyi bakeereeyo okuggalawo amaduuka oba bwe baba balina okukola nga tebatidde nga balina okuwa omusolo abapoliisi ababalabirira. N'ebintu bwe bityo ebigenda mu maaso byeyongedde okumala ku bantu emirembe. N'ekisembayo embeera y'abantu baffe, y'abasirikale baffe abaatwalibwa e Congo mu bumenyi bw'amateeka nakati obukyagenda mu maaso. Kati bamaze wiiki 3 amagye gali mu lutale e Congo nga bannayuganda tebakitegeerangako mu butongole kubanga palamenti yaffe teyakikkiriza, tekyayitayo n'olwaleero. N'amateeka agakitambuza tegagobererwa. Ne operation yennyini gye bakola nga bwe twakyogerako mulundi guli teri agimanyi. Kale kusinziira mu bintu ebyo bye tusooddeyo naye nga bingi, tugamba nti waliwo ebiteekwa buteekwa okukolebwako mbagirawo oba mangu ddala nga bwe kisoboka okutaasa embeera y'abantu baffe. Ng'ekisooka kyekyo eky'ebyobuyigirize kye nakoonyeeko nti walina okubaawo ensawo ey'enjawulo eya ssente eziteekwa okuyamba mangu amasomero aga gavumenti okusooka, aga gavumenti oba gayambibwa gavumenti gonna, okulaba nti ebyetaagisa mu masomero ago n'okugatambuza byonna weebiri, ng'abaana tebanaddayo basobole okuddayo nga tebeetaagibwa okubaako ssente n'ebirala bye bawa mu masomero ago balyoke baddemu okuyiga. Kubanga embeera gye bamaze eka emyaka 2 n'abazadde nga tebakola nga bali mu mbeera eno gye nayogeddeko, tetusobola kugamba nti amasomero gaggulewo buggula. N'amalala agayambibwa gavumenti n'ebisale bye gasaba kati babirinyisizza n'okweyongera ku ebyali bisabibwa ng'amasomero teganaggalwawo, ng'amasomero agayambibwa gavumenti ga ntale school simanyi gani, osanga kati basaba bukadde bwa ssente abantu abava mu muggalo kumala emyaka ebiri. Kale twetaaga ng'ensonga eyo yakukolebwako awamu ssente za gavumenti si za muzadde. Abaana bano si baana ba bazadde, baana b'eggwanga, baana ba Uganda, era kitukakatako ffenna awamu okulaba nti abaana bano basoma, oba omuzadde waali oba taliiwo. N'olwekyo nga tuva mu muggalo y'ensonga lwaki kwe tusimbye ensonga esooka ey'okukolebwako. Ey'okubiri era y'amasomero naye ag'obwannannyini. Masomero ag'obwannannyini gakwata ku buyigirize obw'ebitundu 20 ku buli 100 mu by'obuyigirize mu Uganda bikolebwako amasomero ag'obwannannyini. Kati amasomero ago gonna mu myaka gino ebiri amangi gasaanyeewo. Kati kitukakatako okulaba nti amasomero ago tugateeka mu ssente ne gasobola nago okusituka. Ensonga ey'okusatu, misaala gy'abasomesa n'abakozi b'amasomero abamaze emyaka gino era nga batebakola, nga emisaala kwe baali babasasulira nakati kwe balowooza okubasasulira, naye ng'embeera y'ebbeeyi z'ebintu ebikozesebwa mu ggwanga yo yagenda ddawala mu maaso. So abasomesa bano tujja kuba twerimba okugamba nti bajja kuddayo mu masomero basomese abaana baffe abeetaaga ennyo okukolebwako oluvannyuma lw'ekiseera kino kyonna, naye nga obasasula ku musaala gwe wali obasasula luli. Tulinze nti amasomero gaggulewo tulyoke tutandike ng'abasawo bye babaddemu ng'abaana era tebasoma. Y'ensonga lwaki emisaala y'abasomesa n'abakozi b'amasomero erina okukolebwako ng'abasomesa abo tebanaddayo ku ssomero. Ekyokuna, era abasomesa bano babawadde n'omulimu ogulimu emirimu ebiri, kubanga bagenda kusomesa abaana abo eby'emyaka ebiri mu mwaka gumu nga bagezaako okuyunga ku biri bye baafiirwa okusoma, naye nga teri kye boogera ku nsasula yaabwe. Ekyokuna, abaana baffe abafunye embuto mu muggalo tewali nkola eteereddwawo ey'okulaba ngeri ki gye banaddayo mu masomero. Enkola eyo erina okubaawo kubanga abaana bano newankubadde baafuna embuto balina okuddayo mu masomero beeyongere okusoma kwabwe. N'olwekyo enkola ey'enjawulo yeetaagibwa ebeewo abaana bano ebasobozesa okuddayo. Ekyokutaano, abasawo baffe n'enkola n'ebirabirira eby'obulamu byonna ebigootaanye ennyo erina okukolebwako mangu nga bwe kisoboka, kubanga bwe tugambye tojja kusasula musawo ate akebera omusaayi nga tomusasudde, tojja kusasula musawo nga byakozesa mu ddwaliro tebiriiyo, tojja kusasula musawo nga entambula ena amafuta. So ebintu byonna ebitambula ku kulabirira ebyobulamu byonna byetaaga ensawo ey'enjawulo okuteekebwawo eya ssente okulaba nti bino byonna bikolebwako mangu ddala ebitongole ebyo ebirabirira obulamu bwaffe bisobole okudda engulu. Ekyomukaaga, emisaala gy'abakozi ba gavumenti bonna girina okutunulwamu okusinziira ku mbeera y'ebbeeyi y'ebintu egenze ng'ekyuka ng'eyeeyongera waggulu ate nga abamu ensasula yaabwe eri wansi ddala. Ekyomusanvu kwe kuzza engulu bizinesi z'abantu baffe n'obulamu bwabwe obwakosebwa ennyo okuva mu muggalo, era nga bye nakoonyeeko emisolo, essente ezeewolwa ebbeeyi yaazo, essente ezongera mu bantu abaafiirwa ebintu byabwe amaanyi okutandika, amasannyalaze n'amazzi, renti eya bizinesi ezaggalwawo nakati ezikyali nzigale ng'amabaala go teganaba nakuggulawo, na interest rates ezaba abalina amabanja ga bizinesi ageeyongera ennyo mu muggalo. Ekyomunaana y'ensawo eyeetaagibwa amangu eya ssente okutaasa gavumenti ez'ebitundu n'amatawuni ageetengeredde. Ekyomwenda kwe kukomya kafyu, enkola egaana abantu okutambula ekiro eviirewo ddala mangu ddala nga bwe kisoboka. N'ekisembayo nga kya banaffe be baatwala mu bumenyi bw'amateeka e Congo, ate nga nayo ssente empitirivu zigoberedde emirimu egyo mu kifo ky'okutaasa embeera zino zonna ze twogeddeko wano. So n'olw'ensonga eyo tukkiriza ffe nti essente ezikola ku bino weeziri enkozesa yekyali mbi. Essente ezoonoonebwa, ezibbibwa, ezikola ebitali bya ku mwanjo, ezo ssente zonna bwe tuzijjayo ne tuziteeka ku bintu bino bisoboka kukolebwa mu ssente ze tuyina. Ate ne kye tugamba nti bw'okendeeza emisolo, okukendeeza emisolo tekitegeeza nti essente ziva mu misolo zikendeera, in fact zisobola okweyongera, kubanga emisolo bwe giba waggulu abantu bakukuta nnyo okugyewala kugisasula. Smuggling we yeeyongerera n'abalala okulaba ngeri ki bawa enguzi obutasasula misolo. N'olwekyo emisolo bwe gikendeera, compliance abantu okugisasula yeeyongera. Ate n'ebintu ebbeeyi z'ebintu bwe zikka, abantu beeyongera okukozesa ebintu nekyongera okuleeta emisolo newankubadde level y'omusolo eba wansi. N'olwekyo ssente weeziri ezisobola okukola bino. Tugamba nti ebintu bino bikolebwe mangu, nannyo nga bwe mulabye ebimu byetaaga kukolebwa ng'amasomero teganaggulawo. Amasomero gaweereddwa nga 10 ogw'olubereberye okuggulawo. So tugamba nti ebintu ebyo ebyetaagibwa okukolebwa bikolebwe nga wiiki esooka mu January tenaggwawo, abaana basobole okuddayo ng'ensonga zino zaamala dda kukolebwako. Naye kubanga ekintu kino si kyekyangu, era ffe abalowooza nti ebintu bino tulina okubirwanako, era nga kyekya neerabidde n'oko mu bizibu bye tulwana nabyo, neerabiddeyo kimu ekyakayunga, kubanga ekireetedde embeera eno yonna kubanga bweri lwakuba bannayuganda tebalina ddoboozi. Tetulina ddoboozi mu ggwanga lyaffe. Atalina ddoboozi tasobola gabana, tasobola kulagira ebintu nga bwe binaatambula. Era ekyali ekayunga mwakiraba, obubbi misana nga teri afaayo oba omundaba oba tondaba. Ono nkola ki? Yenkola gye batambuza. Tetufuddeeyo kino kye twagala kye kinaayitawo. Kale mu ggwanga eritalimu bannannyini lyo nga balina ddoboozi, bino byonna tubyogerako ebyetaagibwa naye teri ajja kutuwuliriza. Tubyogera nga tumanyi ti eddoboozi lyaffe bajja kubisekerera n'okubisekerera nabo boogera ki. So kitukakatako eddoboozi lyaffe okulifuula ery'ensonga, eddoboozi ly'abantu bannayuganda nga lyerifuga eggwanga. Ekyo kyekyatandisaawo ekisinde kino ekiruubirira okulaba enkyukakyuka eyo okuva mu bufuzi bw'ekinamagye okudda mu bufuzi obuyimiridde ku kwagala kw'abantu n'eddoboozi ly'abantu. So tubadde ne pulaani ekola ku ekyo, era tubadde tugitambuza kuva lwe twabategeeza ku ofiisi za jeema. Tugenda kati ebyokwogera tubikomeekereza, tugenda kati kuzimba ekirina okukolebwa, era tubadde tukikola. Naye kati embeera eno etuwaliriza okulaba nti tukyongeramu giya, twongeramu omuliro mu nteekateeka zonna ze tubadde nazo, okulaba nti abantu baffe abakkiririza mu kisinde kino n'abakkiririza mu kwekolamu omulimu ng'eggwanga okuleetawo enkyukakyuka ezeetaagisa mu ggwanga lino, nti okutuuka ku nkomerero y'omwezi y'ewiiki eyo esooka mu January, entegeka ezo tulabe nga zituuse we zirina okuba nga ziyamba eggwanga mu kukubiriza abantu n'okubalaga ekyokukola okwetaasa, kubanga ogwo gwe mulimu gw'ekisinde kino. Tugamba nti twegatte, tulumbe, twetaase, era gye tulaga wiiki esooka tandika kubuulira banno twegatte, tulumbe, twetaase. Gwe mulamwa gwe tumala nagwo omwaka. Kati olwaleero era nga gwe gunaaba omulundi ogusembayo okwogera mu mwaka guno, era twayagadde tuwe obubaka eri bannaffe nannyo ab'enzikiriza eya Kristo, kubanga mu wiiki eno yennyini lwe wajaguzibwa olunaku lwe tujjukira amazaalibwa ga Yesu Kristo, era n'olw'ensonga eyo kikulu nnyo okukyogerako. Obulamu n'omulimu gwa Kristo ogujaguzibwa amazaalibwa ge mu wiiki eno gukwatagana nnyo n'embeera eriwo mu nsi yaffe olwaleero. Kristo we yazaalibwa, ekiseera mwe yazaalirwa, waaliwo embeera y'okunyigirizibwa okw'amaanyi ennyo mu bitundu ebyo mwe yazaalirwa, nga mu kiseera ekyo byali bikulemberwa Abaruumi. Abaruumi abaali bawambye ebitundu bingi mu nsi zeeyo, era tewaaliwo obwenkanya n'akamu ku kiseera ekyo. N'abakulembeze b'eddiini baali mu kiseera ekyo beekobaanye n'abakulembeze b'Abaruumi, era nabo nga bali mu nguzi nga tebafuddeeyo ku mbeera z'abantu aba bulijjo. Kuva ku byawandiikibwa mujjukira Kristo ng'alwana n'abo abaali batadde obutale mu masinzizo nga bali mu kukola ssente, mulimu ogwandibadde gwa kulyowa myoyo n'okulungamya abantu n'okusitula eddoboozi ly'abatalina ddoboozi nga baali baaguvaako. Era Kristo bwe yatandika omulimu gwe ne gwesigama ennyo mu kulaba nti abantu baagalana awatali kufaayo oba muntu wa waggulu oba wa wansi, oba ali kumpi n'obufuzi oba tali, okutwala buli omu ng'ekigasa era n'okuwa buli omu ekitiibwa ekimusaanidde. Mulimu gwe kwe gwasinga okwetooloolera, n'okunoonya abali obubi ennyo nga baateekako essira. Kale olw'enjawukana eyo gye yaleetawo wakati w'enkola ye n'abo abaali nga bafuga eggwanga, n'atiisibwatiisibwa n'atulugunyizibwa, era ku nkomerero n'akomererwa ku musaalaba gw'Abaruumi. Naye kuva lwe yafa kutuusa kati abagoberezi ba Kristo be basinga obungi mu nsi. Kati bawerera ddala obuwumbi 2.5 abagoberezi ba Kristo eyakomererwa ku musalaba. Era Abaruumi abaamukomerera ku musalaba gw'Abaruumi kati ku ntebe yaabwe e Roma gye watuula paapa n'omu ku bagoberezi be bwe yaziikibwa St. Peter, era Peter's Basilica, entaana ya St. Peter mweri ku kitebe ky'Abaruumi abaali nga baali bannakyemalira nga batulugunya n'okukomerera ono ku musaalaba. N'olwekyo ebiriwo olwaleero bisaanye okutuwa essuubi n'amaanyi nti ne wakati mu kutulugunyizibwa ne mu kunyigirizibwa okw'amaanyi kwe tuyitamu ku nkomerero, kubanga kye tulwanirira kyekyo eky'obwenkanya, kuba nti buli omu eddoboozi lye lyenkanankana n'erya munne, era n'ekitiibwa ky'obuntu ti buli muntu ayina ekitiibwa, saanye aweebwa ekitiibwa. Ebyo bye tulwanako bisaanye kutuwa essuubi nti abatutulugunya, era singa tebatutulugunya twandirowoozezza nti oba tuli mu kkubo kyabwe, kubanga era balwanirira obwenkanya n'eddembe lya buli omu balina kuyita mu bye tuyitamu olwaleero. So tugende mu biseera bino eby'amazaalibwa nga tuyina essuubi, era mu ngeri eyo newankubadde embeera mbi nnyo ddala ng'abantu tebasobola okubaako ne bye bakozesa mu bulamu bwabwe, naye era tubawa ssuubi nti embeera egenda kukyuka. Nga bwe tubategeezezza mwetegeke, embeera egenda kukyuka. N'olwekyo ku lwaffe bannakisinde kya People's Front for Transition oba Red Card Front, twagaliza bannayuganda bonna n'abagoberezi ba Kristo bonna gye bali mu nsi ebiseera eby'amazaalibwa eby'essanyu n'obuwanguzi, n'omwaka babeerere gwa mirembe. Mwebale nnyo.
Tweyanzege. We want to thank the front chairperson for an elaborate submission about the crisis as we close the 2021 and was ushering us to the year 2022 and what is expected of us and what we feel must be done. At this juncture, I would want to welcome questions. Your name, media house, keep it short and online. Derek.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Doctor, hinted a little about the Kayunga elections and re-emphasized what he has been saying all these years, that elections in and themselves cannot move current government. The people of Kayunga, who are the most disgruntled at the moment, would like to hear from a voice such as yours, telling them that yes, you went into an election, it didn't happen the way you expected, but this is what you should do. So, Doctor, I'd like to hear what would you advise the people of Kayunga at the moment who are the most disgruntled to what should be their way forward after that cabinet election?
Thank you. Yes, Baker. First remove your mask so that you're audible enough.
Doctor, you said so many things that you think should be done prior to the opening of schools and others. But, and you know many of them will not do that. So why are you saying things that you know? It's just saying, but nothing will happen at the end of the day.
Are you a media person? Yes?
Thank you. I've got somewhere now, so I read for the East African Business Week. Doctor, we have talked about the issue of interest rates on the loans, especially the private sector. But remember, Uganda is under implementing a policy of liberalization of the economy. Don't you think that by asking government to convey the commercial bank tax interest, we interfere with the government policy?
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Prince Omala. I work with them.
My
name is Prince Omala. I work with them.
Yes.
I would love to pick it from the front by saying by the end of the first week of January, we are going to take action. Maybe if we can be more elaborate on what kind of action that is.
Kibuze na mu Luganda nkutadde. Yes, another one is coming.
Doctor, I'm handing it to Karu. In relation to Kayunga, you have opposition leaders on opposition, who are still believing that changing all of the problems in the government is through election. Is that a good strategy of taking elections as a strategy to do away with all the problems that happen?
Last question. So there being no question.
Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. First of all, the advice to the people of Kayunga. All the things we talked about affect the people of Kayunga, not just the elections. Their children are going back to school. and they must be concerned about how their children go back to school. The health care issues concern the people of Kayunga immediately. Their businesses are affected. You know, all these things we talked about affect the people of Kayunga. So whereas, yes, the people of Kayunga are concerned about the immediate past by-election, and they should continue agitating in respect of that by-election. But they must understand that the problem is much bigger than their by-election, and must now unite with all other people where there was no by-election, in making this happen. It is our people who must make this happen. The money that is needed to do this is our money. It's not anybody's money. And if we decide, we can put our money where we want it. And that's what this whole effort is driving towards. So the Kayunga people should join all of us in creating a new situation that will also end the voicelessness, the impunity, the abuse of rights that they have just experienced. Now, maybe while still on Kayunga, the question of elections. You see, in a struggle, it's not possible for all to see things the same way at the same time. Even those who are in the same house like we are of PFT, we have differences in how we see certain things. But we agree on some major things that unite us to work on together. And even as we work on them together, that's why we must keep on having regular meetings so that we harmonize our understanding and move together. So it's not surprising that some people still may think that elections on their own can change, can end the military rule. I would have no problems with them. I would only continue to explain to them and to demonstrate to them why we think differently. But they are perfectly entitled to their position, the position they hold. In the time, hopefully, we will link up. Now, why say all these things when they are not likely to be listened to? We are really primarily talking to Ugandans about what our country needs to be done today. And it's important that we crystallize what is needed to be done today. And that's what we are communicating to the people of Uganda, to say, by the way, we are in this crisis. This is what is needed to get out of this crisis. Now, if those who have our money today choose to do this, wonderful, no problem. What we want is that these are done as we think they should be done. But if they don't do them, I don't know why you're asking why we say them. We want them to be done, so we will be on our way to do them. So, but you cannot be on your way to do something you haven't clarified your mind what it is. So everybody out there now, everybody in Uganda should know what PFT wants to be done. And if anybody wants to do it, they are welcome to do it. If they don't want to do it, I've told you we are accelerating. We are engaging gears now because, yes, we are accelerating our own effort to see how we can make sure that these things are done. How do interest rates come down in a liberalized economy? You see, even in a liberalized economy, that's why there is a central bank. There is a regulatory mechanism. It's not a totally laissez-faire system. That it's not an anarchic system. That because it's liberalized, everybody does what they want. No. So, for example, the central bank establishes the CBR, the rate at which banks borrow also. Because banks on lend, but banks also can borrow, including from the central bank. And that rate is set by the central bank. And it can be lowered, and which if you lower, then you impact on what is happening the other side. The second thing which I talked about is the government borrowing itself. Because even in a liberalized economy, if government is the biggest borrower, it means that the demand for credit by others then overwhelms the available money and pushes the interest rates high. So, government must minimize domestic borrowing. If we are to borrow, we borrow from abroad, multilaterally, preferably, preferential borrowing. But if you go to the commercial banks, as is happening now, because the budget, we have a budget of 40, now 40, it was 40, nearly 45, they have added nearly another 4, so it's coming to 49 trillion. But the tax revenue that is anticipated is about 20 trillion. So they are themselves in their planning, they are planning to borrow from here another 20 something trillion. Now these banks, the local banks here, the money that they pull together is about that. So the government goes and takes all the money, and the local businesses then are left to the money lenders. And the money lenders, by the way, are lending our money. They take the money from the government coffers, give it to their relatives, who now become the banks to lend as money lenders. So it's possible using monetary policy, using fiscal policy to influence what the interest rates can be. And all governments do that. What kind of actions? We have a whole range of actions which we have characterized all along for everybody to understand. That first of all, our actions are non-violent. There are acts that will, in whatever way, make it difficult for those who are insisting on their will becoming the will of the country, recognizing that the people, if they unite, their will cannot overwhelm the will of the people. So, and this is why we emphasize the unity of those who are oppressed. But otherwise, you are jumping the gun for specific actions that we can call, and they can differ. They vary. We don't have to use the same. Sometimes when we talk about action, people think that we are going to call people on the streets. Not necessarily. People protesting on the streets is only one way of protest. Maybe not even the most effective way. So the specific actions, you wait when we call for them. We cannot call them. We cannot call for them before we call for them. We shall call for the specific actions when the time comes. So, you know, really, it's so sad that people have no food over holidays like these. In a country that has got, people have helped us. The donations that have come to Uganda since COVID struck Uganda, no accountability whatsoever. The donations, huge amounts. World Bank, IMF, you know, Europeans, all different kinds of donors who have been helping us. No accountability. So, we really must, as a country, end this joke of a system of government. Thank you very much. And I think that ends the presser.
Thank you so much. I want to invite Mr. Lubega Mukaku to introduce our leaders present. Come and do it first.
I think it's not in order, it should have been done earlier. But just for the public and the press to know, first of all, we thank our leader for a good delivery on the representation of the front. And he's here with his deputy leader and the deputy leaders and the front leadership. He's also here, as he told you, he's engaging the GIA. PFT is engaging the GIA. Our parliamentary members, a big clap from the activists, because our parliamentary members are actually a very welcome addition and solidarity with the PFT. And among them we have Honorable Nekalit Dennis Ameri, MP Kitigu Municipality, Honorable Adek Ann Ebaju, Woman MP Soroti, Honorable Francis Mwijuche from Buhweju, and Honorable Harold Muhindo from Busongola. The others are engaged somewhere. I know Honorable Semu Jews, they were all supposed to be here, but we shall go on building on that. But also thank the Lord Mayor and the local leaders. The entire White Hall is well represented. Honorable Nyanjura and Lord Mayor, thank you for that. Yeah. We also thank the young people, the SWAM. You can just stand up for everyone to see and wave, a Christmas wave. Others are working. The activists, thank you very much. And the leaders of entities, most importantly, Honorable and our President, President of the FDC, Patrick Amuriat, the one you know as Power. And we have President John Ken Wichams of the Conservative Party, We have the 2 leaders designate from JEMA, because president of JEMA somewhere, Jogo, Habib, and Mr. Chamundu. I've been seeing him there. We also have the DP block represented by none other than Samuel Lubega Mukaku. I think you know him. We also have members of the UPC. Mr. Warubia just popped out, and former presidential candidate, Mr. Joseph Mabirizi Elton, who just gave us the prayer, and others who are not here abroad on a mission for PFT. So we shall just gather here as leaders, the young leaders and the PFT leadership and the members of parliament and activists for a photo, and that is the Christmas photo as we gear up for year 2022, which is predominantly going to be a year of action, as our chairman has announced. Can the chairman lead his people for a group photo? Where do you want it to be?
Here.
Here?
Here.
Okay. This should be moved. This should be moved away. Can we?
No, it seems they like it.
Okay, they like the car.
Yeah.
Okay, we just take the photo. There we go. Yeah. Mr. President and leaders of entities and members of parliament.
In a government.
Yeah, in a car.
We stand here.
Yeah, but you should see you, chairman.
These are still necessary.
They are still necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, in a curve such that everyone can be seen.
Done?
Yes. I think we are done.
For Uganda, may God uphold thee, we lay our future in your hands. United and free for liberty, together we always stand. Thank you.
Twegate.
Tulumbe.
Twetase.
I've seen her running in Arusha. She runs like Chemtai.
Chemtai?